Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. This time, we shall be celebrating a brand new year, about a month late, as we review episode 13, Cappy New Year. Yes, it is a pun on Happy New Year. Or as it's called in the Japanese original, Poo Poo Village's Year-End Fireworks Party. Yeah, it's a bit more of a mouthful, but let us begin. Okay, so before we go over the plot, much like last time, we have to go over how much the English dub just utterly bamboozled the episode number and how they were released. And how this also led to me making a grievous mistake that I wish to rectify now, because I am an honest man of principle. Okay, so the last episode, Escargoon Squad, was changed from the 12th episode to the 14th, so that it would better line up with Halloween. This episode, which was chronologically next, was changed to 29th episode, so that it better aligned with the American New Year. This, of course, makes sense. The American New Year is a bit different than the Japanese New Year, but it led to a few problems. Firstly, there is the ripple effect I mentioned in the last episode, because it caused other episodes to be messed up as well. Secondly, it wasn't even released on the new year. It being released on December 28th, which is 2 whole days before the actual new year. So it just, in the end, their attempt was futile. So this whole situation kind of just seems futile, and we'll keep having to mention this throughout the series, but it's been long enough, so let us start with that plot. And boy, true to its New Year inspiration, it starts with a bang as the enemy sales guy wishes the king a happy new year. The king, who is pacing back and forth, tells the sales guy he made a New Year's resolution. Which, man, king, you are setting yourself up for failure. Nobody ever succeeds at keeping those resolutions. The enemy sales guy then makes the extremely easy guess to what the resolution is, that being to get rid of the annoying pink buffball Kirby. The king explains he can't take 12 more months of Kirby, which, considering there are still 87 episodes left, and considering these episodes were released weekly, yeah, sorry, you got more than 12 months of Kirby to deal with, Deity. The king then asks the enemy sales guy to get him the most powerful monster they got. The sales guy warns the king that he has very little money in his account. The king ignores this and says he'll spend it all if he has to. The sales guy then calculates a number. Whether this is a genuine price, or he's simply asking for all the money that happens to be left in the king's account, is unknown. Deity agrees to the price. The transportation system then, through the power of reused animation, delivers the monster of the week, Sasuke, which is mispronounced in the English dub as Sasuke, which is, let's just say, pretty bad. I mean, it's literally your job to pronounce a Japanese word, and you somehow still fail at it. But yes, this is the monster of the episode, and let's go ahead and cover him. Originally introduced in Kirby's Dreamland 3, while being very game accurate, there are some minor differences between the game depiction and the anime depiction. Firstly, in the game, Sasuke has smaller eyes and his body is noticeably more orange with yellow feet. He also has a clearly visible mouth. In contrast, the anime, he has a redder body, larger, more detailed eyes with pale purple pupils and light purple feet. And he also has hands in the anime, which he puts to great use later on, as we will see. Also, the anime Sasuke lacks a mouth, which explains why he lacks a voice in both the English dub and the Japanese original. Being a silent monster, he is referred to as a fireworks craftsman in the Japanese original, while in English dub, he's just called a fireworks monster. Really seems to have been a change that didn't need to be happening, but the king and Escargoon are a bit skeptical of the monster, with Deity calling him a lawn ornament, and Escargoon questioning the monster's ability. Like most short people, Sasuke gets really angry and flings circular fireworks at the snail, leaving him burned as they explode right in his face. Deity is then impressed by the little monster. After the intro, we cut to Cappy Town, where we see Chef Kawasaki, Gus, Professor Curio, and the mayor discussing the new year and what people in various other regions do. This does expand the world, and according to Kawasaki, in the north, people eat soba and listen to bells to welcome in the new year. Kier then says in some places they reflect silently on the past year. In the Japanese original, this line was him saying, where he comes from, people silently pray. This was changed, likely to avoid overt allusions to religion, so as not to offend certain people. Gus then explains in the county they dance all day till the break of dawn, which is accurate. The mayor sighs, saying that in Cappy Town they don't do anything for New Year's. With a sense of sadness, Professor Curio and Kawasaki are similarly depressed about the lack of festivity for the new year, saying it's just a long, dark night. But then Gus has the bright idea to suggest they do something different this year. Decory agrees, which, due to being a terrible person, almost kills the idea before it even starts, where he says that they should stay up till 11. Really, Bird? Is that your idea of a celebration? Luckily, Tiff salvages this idea, as she says it's a great opportunity, as they are able to make their own celebration without having to stick to tradition. Unfortunately, before a New Year's celebration can be decided on their own, Deity shows up in his huge tank. Escargoon then makes an announcement. In the Japanese original, he attempts to warn everyone of fire and take extra precautions as the year comes to an end. This is very well integrated foreshadowing to King Deity's announcement of a fireworks show. In the English dub, he merely says the king has an announcement before the megaphone starts acting up. Strangely, Kirby seems to be completely unaffected by the megaphone's extremely loud and annoying just technical issues. This indicates that Kirby is tone deaf, and trust me, we'll see that later. This anime is really good at doing these subtle little hints about the future. Deity, taking the microphone away, announces that there will be a New Year's extravaganza. This leads to mixed reactions. Tiff is depressed at his involvement. Tuff asks if it's a show, which causes Takora to say he'll be a no-show. Good. You're a terrible bird. No one wants you here, to Corey. The Cappy's reaction is changed between the two versions. In the Japanese original, Hannah says it could be a fashion show, Gus saying it might be cosplay, whereas Mabel wonders if it will be a beauty contest. In the English dub, this is changed, whereas here, Hannah wonders if it will be a musical. Gus says it might be a car show, and it is Mabel who says it could be a fashion show. Personally, I do think this change makes more sense. I mean, Gus seems to be more of a mechanic and less of a cosplayer. Also, especially way back then, cosplaying was way less popular, and the reference might not have really been impactful to the American audience. Either version, the King Deity dismisses all the Cappies as knuckleheads and explains it'll be a fireworks show. He explains that first there will be a parade, then a fireworks Big Bang spectacle. Those are his mispronunciations, not mine. The crowd asks surprised, as the various Cappies consider making their own floats. However, the king warns them that only he is making a float. He then drives off, back to the castle. The Cappies are outraged, with Gus suggesting they make their own fireworks. The mayor asks Tiff if she can ask her father, Sir Ibram, to ask the king to reconsider his decision. She answers that the king likely won't change his mind, and she suggests that they make floats regardless of his opinion. The adults all agree, including Takore, who's unfortunately still here. Everyone is super excited, except Kirby, who's just sitting there completely confused as to what's going on. However, we then cut to Deity driving away. The king talks to Escargoon, revealing that it was actually his plan the whole time to pull reverse psychology, revealing he's way smarter than he appears, and actually wanted them to make floats, and that knowing how they'd react to him saying no. He then laughs maniacally as they drive away. We then cut to the police station. There, Chief Bookum explains to the adults the dangers of fireworks. In the Japanese version, there's a cut scene where Gus walks up and pulls out a pistol when the chief talks about gunpowder. He pretends to shoot it before Chief Bookum puts it away. Man, these Cappies are packing heat. This was likely removed from the English dubbing to avoid references to gun violence, which honestly does make a little sense, but I do oppose censorship, and really, the gun wasn't even shot, so it wasn't even depicted in a negative way. I will say, though, that without the scene, the episode is a bit more smooth when it comes to the overall plot. Chief Bookum then points to the gunpowder before a loud bang scares him for a second. The adults look outside and see Spikehead, Tough, and the other kids playing with sparklers. There is added laughter in the English dub. It's pretty much completely silent in the Japanese version. He then tells them to make sure the kids don't go in, else the whole place could go boom due to the sparklers. Kirby adorably trips over with an unlit sparkler in his hand, which Tiff notices and Tough lights for him. The happy puffball goes frolicking then. Meanwhile, inside, the adults are measuring gunpowder for the fireworks. Professor Kier pulls out a pipe in one of the few times a drug reference was left in the English dub. He almost drops it right into the gunpowder. In the Japanese original, Chief Bookum spooked him, which is the reason why he almost dropped it, whereas in the English dub, he just carelessly seems to almost drop it. I do prefer the version where Chief Bookums spooks him, but the English dub also works perfectly fine. Also, I think the only reason they left in this drug reference was because it was depicting drugs in a negative way. In either case, Chief Bookums scolds the professor for his carelessness, but guess who's right out of frame? Kirby holding a sparkler. Interestingly, in the Japanese original, there's an animation error, as Kirby's sparkler is not lit until the camera pans out. This is fixed in the English dub, so this is one of the few times that the English dub makes a visual change, and it's done in a positive manner. Usually it involves censorship, but in this case it actually makes sense. The kids and adults, however, react in horror as the predictable happens. We then cut to Kirby having the ash washed off of him by Tiff, who assures Kirby it wasn't his fault, and Tiff says it was one big explosion, while Iroh and Spike Head say the adults won't let them make fireworks now anymore. Tiff, however, remains hopeful, as she says the adults will likely come back for their help. While the adults are sitting in the pile of rubble that was formerly the police station, they wonder what they should do. They decide to consult Tiff after Gus suggests they ask her. In the Japanese original, Kiryu suggests consulting Mabel, the fortune teller, to which she jumps back and laughs. Whereas in the English dub, this line was removed, yet she still reacts the same, so it just looks like she laughs for no reason. Also, the laugh is louder in the English version, which just makes it more noticeably odd. They go to Tiff and take her to Kawasaki's restaurant, who suggests they create floats based on their individual interests. In the Japanese original, she says a slightly different line, as she advises them to make individualized decorations, like suggesting Kiro to make a float dedicated to Dreamland's prehistory, or Kawasaki make a float about food. The English dub is, in general, more vague in this specific scene. Also in this scene, we see a lantern inside the restaurant. It has its katanana airbrushed out. The same is for the painting as well. Tiff also gives advice to Chief Bookums, saying he should make a float based on the police. Luckily, this was in the early 2000s, otherwise there'd be a mostly peaceful riot outside. Also, let us just note that Chief Bookums uses arresting in the proper way. It's kind of weird. Ladylike and Sir Ibram overhear Tiff, and the pair decide to make their own float. Though Ladylike is a bit concerned about King Deity's new monster, which Deity, man, you need to get better security. Seriously, it seems not just Meta Knight who's, sneaking about, but just people like Ladylike can just hear about the new monsters you get. It's really biting you in the butt. Tiff also is concerned and asks about the monster, and Tuff decides to investigate. We then cut to Castle Deity, where we see Sasuke working on Deity's float, having already made the metal skeleton. The king asks him what he's doing. The monster, being caught up in his work, ignores him, which is understandable. Escargoon, annoyed at this, yells at the monster to answer the king. The monster midget, getting really annoyed at the interruption, of his work, pulls out a freaking pistol and starts shooting like a gangbanger. This is way more violent than the last cut gun scene, but darn, man. It's so out of place, but it's also so memorable. Plus, they leave in the shooting scene in the English dub, which, even though you cut the gun scene, it's still quite obvious that he's shooting a gun at the king and the snail, so it pretty much seems pointless, this whole censorship. Either that or he shot a nail gun at him. Escargoon calls the monster a pyromaniac that is uncontrollable, and says they can't trust him. But Deity asks how else can they get rid of Kirby, to which Escargoon answers by showing the king something he made. That being this large fireworks missile called Toepodon in the original. This is a reference to the North Korean ballistic missile system Taepodong, which wouldn't really resonate with the English speakers, so that was removed. But it does kind of highlight just the fear of the Koreans that Japanese people have. Tough, Polo, Fala, and Kirby had managed to get access to the missile, but run to hide as Deity and Escargoon arrive. Escargoon makes a good point to the king as to why the king bankrupts himself when the snail can make such great machines. And I agree, why do that? I mean, he does it occasionally in the series, but never on a consistent level. Tough and the gang hide until Kirby trips up and they are exposed. Tough grabs Kirby and runs to escape, but Deity rushes over to a switch and pulls it. This causes a robotic hand to emerge and grabs Kirby, tearing him out of Tough's hand. The hand stretches as Tough begs for Kirby to be released. Deity then says he'll send Kirby on a 2001 year-long space odyssey, which is a reference to that movie, which, by the way, is where HAL Laboratories got it from. HAL 1000, HAL Laboratories, get it? Sadly, this reference was cut in the English dub, and I'm not sure why. I think it'd work even more in the English dub than in the Japanese original, so I'm not quite sure why they cut that out. The arm flings Kirby around the room, which, given his rubbery body, doesn't really hurt him all that much. Tough escapes with Kirby, as Deity and Escargoon laugh evilly. I'm not sure why they let Kirby escape, but I guess they didn't really take him all that seriously, which they should, but Tough then warns the Kawasaki and Tiff about the giant.
You want us to cancel?
Kawasaki and other adults dismiss this and say without evidence they won't call off the event. We then cut to New Year's night, where we see loads of lights have been put up, as Tiff and Tough are worried about the king's plot, though Kirby is just innocently playing with Fololo and Falala. The mayor then picks up a microphone and announces the New Year party starting. The various lights around the village go out as the mayor announces the first float, which he calls...
I call it Bow 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 Boom!
Yeah, it's obviously sheep inspired, because he's a sheep farmer in addition to being the mayor. Also, I don't usually talk about the music because it's always supplementary, but I do like the Japanese soundtrack here better. It just works better with the parade. Also, the CGI on the floats is terrible, but I don't mind because there's that certain just appearance you see on most paper mache floats, and they always look a bit disturbing, but in general, I don't think the poor CGI really harms them in the way that, say, a poorly done CGI monster of the week would. Thirdly, Gus didn't get a float despite being actually relatively involved in the plot. It's kind of a shame, really. We then see Chef Kawasaki's float, which is him with food in his arms and a fork. In the Japanese version, he said his food would be half the original price the next day. In the English dub, this is changed to him saying, "Who says my food isn't light?" This is, sorry to explain a joke, a pun based on how his float displays food and is covered in lights. Gus, apparently annoyed that he didn't get his own float, says it looks better than Kawasaki's actual food. Professor Curio then explains that his float is a celebration of Cappy Town's prehistoric civilizations, which, a few things. Either Curio is a Cappy creationist, or Cappy once coexisted with dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Also, why are there no feathers, man? And why is the pterosaur standing like that? And why do ancient Cappies look pretty much identical to modern ones, except with Fred Flintstone's shirt? Man, so scientifically inaccurate. 0 out of 10. We then see Chief Bookum's float, which is a prisoner, most likely Doron, chained to a ball. Yeah, this would definitely offend somebody these days, but luckily people back then were of stronger wills. Chief Bookums warns everyone that this is what happens to criminals, which having a parade float made of you isn't really all that much of a punishment, but in all seriousness, we know what he means. In the Japanese original, he advises Cappies to call 911 in the case of emergencies or criminals, which is a much better message in my opinion. Also, the crowd is, in general, just louder in the English dub. We then see Sir Ibram and Lady Like's float. It's fine, if a bit embarrassingly charming. We then cut to a shot of a circular camera pan to all the floats as the parade goes up the hill towards Deity's castle. And then we see some fireworks going off. To which Curio has a reaction that is changed between versions. In the Japanese original, he refers to the display as heaven on earth. In the English dub, this is changed to him saying the king outdid himself. This was done to avoid offending any religion by avoiding allusions to religion from this series as a whole. Honestly, this makes no sense, as the allusion wasn't in a harmful way. Neither was Curio praying. Gus tries to dismiss the king as he lacks a float, but Chef Kawasaki points to the moat as a huge display emerges from the water, and Deity's float, which is pretty well done, emerges. The mayor points out how much bigger and better the float is, but Tough counters and points out how Deity unfairly got help, which, I mean, that's how illegal workers work, man. They tend to do work better in some cases. They go to prove that their floats are just as good as Deity's is. However, Sasuke decides to then shoot at them. In the Japanese original, there's also this little escargoon float that Tiff and Spikehead and Iroh destroy by throwing their sparklers on it, which sets it on fire. This was removed for unknown reasons, possibly so that there wouldn't be kids that would try to copy the behavior, which is pretty dumb, because I think kids are smarter than we give them credit for, in all honesty. And I think it's really bad when people make apologetics for bad actions, just in general, like censorship. They also removed all scenes that fully displayed or mentioned the float for continuity reasons. But we still see the float in the background of some shots. So there appears to be a mistake, even though there really shouldn't be a mistake. Sasuke then, using the float, begins chucking strangely Kirby-shaped bombs at Kirby, who stares in bemusement before being blasted away. Sasuke keeps throwing bombs at Kirby, who's blown away. Tiff then yells to Kirby to suck up the fireworks. Deity orders Sasuke to attack Kirby with all the fireworks they got, which Kirby inhales to become...
What's he doing?
Go, Kirby! He inhaled him!
Fire Kirby. You know, honestly, this was a mistake. I mean, I know fire is in the word fireworks, but when it comes to Kirby abilities, I think a bomb would fit better. Plus, they had to change Kirby's breath attack to better fit the theme of the episode, which, I mean, just makes him no longer really Fire Kirby, makes him Firework Kirby. I just think they should have made him Bomb. We'll get back to this later. Fire Kirby and Sasuke exchange blows in a sort of stalemate. Also, Meta Knight shows up to say Fire Kirby, apparently. He wanted to give Kirby a Happy New Year, but feared that this may be Kirby's last year. Honestly, I'm more scared of why Meta Knight is here. The Cappies think this whole thing is a show, despite Tough telling them otherwise. Eventually, Kirby gets knocked back as Sasuke overpowers him and starts shooting more blasts at Kirby, who hides behind a rock. Meta Knight comments on how the old year may not be the only thing to end now. Wow, way to keep hopes up, dude. Tiff then calls for the Warp Star! In the Japanese original, there's a small scene where the camera is zoomed out on the ground on the road leading to Kaboo before zooming in to see as the star comes out, as it normally does. This was cut for unknown reasons, probably to save time. The Warp Star arrives and saves Kirby, just as the rocket gives in. Also another excellent meme face as Tough freaks out before his sister points to the Warp Star, which Kirby grabs onto. Not giving up, Sasuke keeps shooting at Kirby in the air. And after seeing some more parts of the intro, Kirby releases a huge blast right into Deity's float. Deity's response has changed between the Japanese and English dub. In the Japanese original, Deity calls out Sasuke's name, thinking he died. But Escargoon then spots Sasuke with his telescope and tells the king Sasuke is safe. In contrast, in the English dub, Deity just yells in anger at the float's destruction, while Escargoon assures him they still have the secret missile weapon. The blast sends Kirby flying, and Sasuke, who survives, comes dashing out with the huge missile. And man, Sasuke is really strong. I mean, consider how small he is compared to that missile, and consider how huge that missile is. Also, was the missile like really nearby? Was it on the float? Was it in the display? Where was that? Did he? Because if he ran all the way to the castle just to get that missile, he's also really fast. This little guy is really something, am I right? Kirby, still falling from the blast, knocked out by all the fireworks, is hit by the rocket lit by Sasuke. Kirby wakes up as Sasuke goes to approach him. Meanwhile, Escargoon orders the Waddle Dees to fire on the rocket, which they do after being ordered by Waddle Doo. And Meta Knight points out this, and Tough screams fruitlessly. But Kirby Having almost had enough of his Japanese monster, sucks him up. The huge firework explodes, and everyone assumes Kirby is dead. We cut to Kaboo, Wispy Woods, and Dynablade. Dean and Escargoon rejoice, but stop when they see something falling. That thing being the remains of the rocket, which, really, a large piece such as that shouldn't have survived. This just reminded me. I can't believe this episode just reminded me of the Rise of Skywalker. Gosh darn it. Writers, when something explodes in that complete of a manner, there aren't huge chunks that survive. There are minuscule pieces at best. Tiff wonders where Kirby is, but Meta Knight points to Kirby, who is floating down as Paracel. And, okay, so I think I'll get into this now. I did allude to this earlier with the Fire Kirby section. Firstly, the appearance in the anime is pretty well done. It's pretty much identical to the Kirby Superstar Paracel. But here's the thing. It didn't need to be here. Paracel Kirby does nothing at all that Kirby couldn't have done with just his normal abilities. I mean, we've seen Kirby fly. He could have just floated down on his own. The episode ends as Cappy's citizens begin counting down to the new year. Wait, is that a Hitler salute? Anyways, they count down to the new year, and the episode ends with the words, "A Happy New Year," appearing as fireworks in the sky, and Kirby floating down to the ground, smiling happy. So, now, let's go over the positives, the negatives, and my final thoughts. First, I actually like how the plot makes the subpar CGI actually not that bad. Also, the monster, Sasuke, despite lacking a voice, is one of the most expressive monsters in the series. You really get his personality through his behavior. And it's also the fact that he uses brain and not so much his brawn until it's needed, and that really makes him unique to most other monsters, which just tend to mindlessly attack Kirby in some manner or another. Also, this guy's not dead. In fact, he may be worse off because he's stuck forever in limbo in Kirby's belly. I actually kind of wish he had died, honestly. Because, man, that's a fate worse than death. Imagine being stuck in Kirby for all eternity. I like how Tiff and the adults interact. It's a somewhat realistic way, and the pace of the story is very explosive, which makes sense in terms of the episode. But in terms of flaws, there's one big one that I've mentioned before, and that's the abilities. Firstly, there are two in this episode, which normally is amazing. And there's even a new one, which is normally even more amazing. But the fact that a new ability is completely not used in a fight, and the fact that the fire ability is changed to the point where it might as well be a different ability. And thirdly, the fact that Paracel is just one of the weaker abilities in the games really undermines what would be an otherwise awesome event. There are also some, minor flaws, like the Escargoon float being taken out, the fact that Gus pretty much had nothing to do with this episode, even though he should have gotten his own float based on his various interactions, the fact that he came up with the idea. There are also some criticisms that I think are less than valid. There are some that call this episode racist. And like in the Big Taste test, this is just a load of bollocks. Firstly, it's a reference to the fact that apparently the term multicultural was used in the original Japanese release, and that was changed in the English dub. Firstly, in the context it's being used, it's referring to the fact that due to being a much more recently founded town, it doesn't really have a tradition in the same sense that other Cappy regions, which this episode is actually pretty good at world building, but it's sort of in the voiced way, not the actual way we see. And that is a bit of an issue. but in the context, it makes sense. Plus, the word in and of itself is not racist. I really don't know what to tell you if you think using the term multicultural is racist. It's just a fact. Also, Japan is not well known for its diversity. It's pretty much all one ethnic group. Let's be honest here. In conclusion, as far as holiday-based episodes, which is a common trend in the series, this is one of the better ones, but it still has flaws. I can still recommend it if you're interested in the series, as it is still one of the better episodes. I'm the Dark Master, and thank you for watching. Join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. Have a nice day, everybody.